I was born in the kind of place you only drive through when you're lost. The kind of place that never makes the news unless there's a blizzard that buries the interstate or a murder strange enough to make outsiders care. Rural North Dakota isn't a destination. It's a survival test. The winters are long here, endless stretches of white that swallow the roads and make every farmhouse look like it's floating in a frozen sea. Summers don't feel much better. The wind rattles through empty barns and carries dust that burns your throat. Even the ground itself seems unfriendly, frozen hard half the year and cracked the other half. But worse than the cold or the isolation were the rules. My father gave them to me when I was still young enough to think rules were just chores dressed up as wisdom. He was not a man of explanations. He didn't believe in wasting words, and he sure as hell didn't believe in comforting lies. He believed in survival. He told me the rules on a night when the wind screamed against the window and the lamplight flickered like it wanted to die. He sat me down at the old oak table in the kitchen, his eyes set on me like I was a soldier getting his orders. He said them slowly, one by one, like scripture. Rule number 1, never go outside after dark without a lantern. Rule number 2, if you hear knocking on the walls, don't answer. Rule number 3, always leave food at the tree line once a week. Rule number 4, never look directly at the scarecrow in the west field. Rule number 5, if you wake up to silence, stay in bed until sunrise. He leaned back in his chair after that, arms folded. He didn't smile. He didn't soften it with a laugh like it was some rural ghost story. He just stared, waiting for me to nod. At the time, I thought they were superstitions. Every old town has them, doesn't it? My classmates used to talk about phantom hitchhikers, about lights in the sky. Some even believed in haunted barns where men had hanged themselves during the Dust Bowl. I figured my father was no different, just another voice in the chorus of small-town paranoia. But the thing is, he lived by those rules, strictly. He never once broke them, not even for convenience. And after my mother disappeared one winter, he doubled down. The rules weren't just suggestions anymore. They were survival. I never got an explanation. He would never say why. I asked 100 times as a kid, sometimes whining, sometimes screaming. He never raised his voice back, never gave me the truth, just repeated the same thing. Obey them, or you won't see another sunrise. Back then, I thought he was just scaring me into obedience, the way parents sometimes do. But now, after all these years, after all the nights I've lived through alone, I know he wasn't lying. Neighbors who ignored the rules didn't last. People who thought they were just old folktales ended up as whispers themselves. Names carved into church gravestones no one visits anymore. I've never broken them, not once, and I'm still alive to tell you this. I grew up under those rules like other kids grew up under bedtime curfews and Sunday school sermons. For me, the rules weren't something to bend when Dad wasn't looking. They were stitched into the walls of our farmhouse, into the frozen ground itself. When I tell you my childhood was quiet, I don't mean peaceful. Silence here doesn't comfort you. It presses down, suffocates you, makes you notice every creak of wood and every change in the wind. Most nights, the house complained like it was alive, rafters moaning, pipes clicking, the stove sighing when its flames sank low. But then there were the nights when all that sound stopped at once. That was worse. My father called it the stillness. And when it came, he would grip my arm hard enough to leave bruises and hiss. Don't you move. Don't you breathe too loud. Not until the sun comes. I didn't understand, but I learned not to argue. My earliest memory of real fear wasn't the scarecrow or the knocking. It was the night my mother vanished. I was 7. The storm outside had finally broken, leaving the world drowned in a silence so deep I thought my ears had stopped working. My father froze when he realized it, lantern flame trembling in his hand. He whispered Rule 5 under his breath. If you wake up to silence, stay in bed until sunrise. But my mother, she didn't listen. She said she was just going to check the barn, to make sure the animals were warm. She kissed me on the forehead like it was nothing, like she wasn't breaking one of the rules. I waited. My father waited too, but he didn't try to stop her. He just sat at the table, staring at the floorboards, lips pressed tight. She never came back. By dawn, there were no tracks leading from the house, no storm damage, no open doors, just absence. My father buried his grief the way men here bury their dead, deep, without a word. And from that morning on, the rules weren't suggestions anymore. They were carved into my life like commandments. I avoided the West Field as a boy, but sometimes I caught glimpses of the scarecrow from the corner of my eye. It stood tall on its wooden post, arms stretched stiff, its head a burlap sack sewn with two uneven black circles for eyes. What always struck me was that it didn't look old. It should have sagged with rain, torn with wind, bleached by the sun, but year after year, it stayed the same. The sack never rotted. The clothes never faded. The worst part was the way it always seemed to be facing the farmhouse, even though its post was fixed. I never looked directly at it for long, because the fourth rule burned in my mind. Never look directly at the scarecrow in the West Field. And yet, even as a child, I swore its head was tilted differently each time I glanced at it. If the scarecrow was a silent threat, the knocking was alive. It always came late, when the lantern burned low and my eyelids sagged with sleep. At first it was soft, like fingertips brushing the siding, then louder, insistent. Sometimes it came from the front door, sometimes the back wall, sometimes from my bedroom window, 3 floors up. My father would grip my shoulder until I froze and whisper, "Rule 2. If you hear knocking on the walls, don't answer." One night, when I was 9, my cousin Jeremy stayed over. He was older, 13, and thought he knew better. He called my father paranoid, said these rules were just ways to scare me into obedience. That night, the knocking came harder than ever, rattling the window panes. Jeremy grinned, raised his fist, and tapped back 3 times. The silence that followed was worse than the knocking. I felt it in my teeth, in my chest, like the world had taken one long, deep breath. By morning, Jeremy was gone. His bed was neatly made. His boots were by the door. No one ever found him. My father said one thing only. He answered, "That's all you need to know." His parents never spoke to us again. They moved away a month later. Everyone in town said Jeremy had run off, that boys that age do that. But I knew the truth. It wasn't just my cousin. Our whole town seemed to thin out over the years. Families would vanish, leaving houses with tables still set and laundry still on the line. People called it moving away, but I never saw anyone pack a truck. I just saw homes grow dark, one after another, until only a handful of us were left. The church bells stopped ringing. The school closed when I was 12. Even the sheriff's office went dark, its windows boarded, its radio silent. The world outside moved on, but our little stretch of land froze in time. Those of us who stayed, we lived by the rules. That was the unspoken truth. Break them, and you wouldn't last. I grew into the rules the way kids grow into hand-me-down boots. They were heavy, stiff, and uncomfortable at first, but eventually they fit so well I couldn't imagine walking without them. The lantern became part of me. I carried it like other kids carried flashlights. I whispered the rules before sleep like prayers. And when I dreamed, the rules followed me there too, the scarecrow in my nightmares always watching, the knocking always waiting. Even now, as an adult, I don't pretend to understand them. I don't know what waits beyond the tree line, or why the silence is so deadly. I just know the rules work. They kept my father alive. They've kept me alive. And if you're listening, maybe they'll keep you alive too. For most of my life, the farm sat alone in the endless sprawl of fields and frost. Neighbors were distant shapes on the horizon. Headlights on dirt roads, smoke rising from chimneys far away. That was how I liked it. That was how my father liked it too. But then, one winter, after years of silence and emptiness, someone new moved in. The old farmhouse half a mile down the road had been abandoned for so long I thought it would collapse into the earth before anyone touched it. Its paint was stripped gray, its windows black and cracked, the porch sagging under decades of snow and rot. I never saw a for sale sign, never heard talk in town about buyers. But one day, a truck appeared in the driveway, and a man unloaded boxes like he belonged there. His name was Craig. He was in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, with a city man's confidence and a city man's smile. He wore a leather jacket that looked too new for the cold and boots that weren't built for the kind of winters we had. When I introduced myself, he grinned and stuck out a hand. His palm was warm, firm. That was the first thing that unsettled me. People here had hands like stone, calloused and cracked by weather. His felt soft, out of place. We sat on his porch that first day, and I tried to warn him, not all at once. You don't unload the rules on a stranger like you're handing him a death sentence. But I hinted, I told him how dangerous the nights could be, how strange things had happened here. Craig laughed. A real laugh, belly deep. "Ghost stories?" he said, shaking his head. "I grew up with those too. Hook-handed killers, Bloody Mary in the mirror. You can't scare me with farmer tales." I wanted to push, to make him take it seriously. But there was something in his eyes, a spark of stubbornness, of disbelief, so thick it turned into arrogance. I knew then he wouldn't listen. That was the problem. Outsiders never do. Within a week, I caught him splitting logs out back after sunset. No lantern in sight. His axe thudded into wood under the fading sky, the dark swallowing him until I could barely make out his figure. I called to him across the fence line, waving my lantern. "You shouldn't be out without a light." He laughed again. "What for? Wolves?" I wanted to scream at him, to drag him inside by force, but I didn't. My father's words echoed in my mind. You can't save someone who doesn't believe. The rules only hold for those who follow them. So I turned and went home, my stomach twisting. That night, I sat awake, lantern burning beside my bed, and listened. Sunday came. The sky was slate gray, clouds heavy with snow. I carried bread and dried meat to the tree line like I always did, laying it on the frozen ground where forest met field. Craig watched me from a distance. When I came back, he smirked. "What are you doing out there?" he asked. "It's just something you do," I said. "Part of living here." He chuckled. "You're feeding the woods? Jesus. No wonder no one lives out here anymore." I didn't argue. What would have been the point? But that evening, as the sky bled into black, I saw him walk to the edge of his own property with a plate of steak. He set it down in the snow, saluted the tree line like he was mocking a king, and walked back, grinning. The next morning, the meat was untouched, frozen stiff where he'd left it. I didn't say a word, but I swear I saw a shadow move between the trees when I collected my own empty plate. It was only a matter of time before Craig noticed the scarecrow. Everyone does. You can't miss it standing tall against the western horizon, arms outstretched, burlap face staring forever toward the house. I caught him out there one evening, hands on his hips, staring at it like it was a curiosity at a roadside carnival. "You know," he called to me across the snow, "this thing's not so scary up close. Don't look at it," I snapped. My voice came out harsher than I meant. He grinned. "What happens if I wave at it? Think it'll wave back?" And then he did. He raised his hand high, fingers waggling, and laughed like a boy at a dare. I couldn't watch. I turned and marched home, repeating Rule 4 under my breath until the farmhouse swallowed me. That night, the wind carried something strange. Not laughter, not exactly, but a low rustling, like burlap dragging over frozen ground. The longer Craig stayed, the heavier the rules pressed down on me. It felt like living beside a man juggling lit matches over a field of gasoline. I started noticing things again, things I hadn't seen since childhood. Movements at the edge of the forest, lights flickering too far from any road, shadows that stretched across the snow, even when the moon was hidden. One night, while I sat by my window, lantern steady at my side, I saw a figure move between Craig's house and the tree line. It was too tall, too thin, its limbs wrong, bent backwards, or maybe sideways. I couldn't tell. I shut the curtains and whispered the rules, heart hammering. Craig, meanwhile, seemed unfazed. The next morning, he waved at me like nothing was wrong. There's a weight that comes before the rules are tested, like the whole land is holding its breath. I felt it then. The nights grew colder, quieter. The knocks started again, faint on my walls, then louder, circling like a predator. It had been years since I'd heard them, but their rhythm was the same. Knock, knock, knock. Too steady to be wind, too human to be branches. I held my breath under the blankets, gripping my lantern, whispering, Rule 2. Across the fields, I thought I heard something else, wood splitting in the night. A man's laugh carried by the wind. Craig. He was breaking them one by one, and I knew it was only a matter of time before something answered back. All right, now we're entering the turning point. The neighbor breaks the first rule. This section will be longer with sustained suspense, detail, and a cliffhanger near the midpoint and end. The night it happened, I knew something was coming. The air had that weight to it again, like the whole sky was pressing down on the land. No crickets, no owls, no rustle of wind through the bare branches. Just stillness, but not the deadly stillness of Rule 5. This was different. This was the silence before a scream. Craig had invited me over for dinner. He said it in passing, like we were normal neighbors, like this place was normal. Against my better judgment, I went. Maybe I wanted company. Maybe I wanted to feel, for just one night, like life here wasn't all rules and survival. His house smelled like steak and whiskey. The fire roared too high in the hearth, and for the first time in years, I felt almost warm. He poured me a glass of bourbon and laughed about how boring the prairie was. I tried to steer the conversation, tried to warn him again, gently. "You should keep a lantern by your door," I said. "The nights out here aren't safe." Craig grinned. "You and your rules. You sound like an old preacher." I wanted to argue, but he changed the subject, talking about cities, jobs, women. He made it sound so far away, like another life. For a while, I let myself believe him. It was late when he stood, glass in hand, and said he needed some air. He walked to the door, boots clunking on the wood, and I felt a chill slide down my spine. "No," I said, sharper than I meant. "Not without a lantern." He chuckled, waved me off. "I'll be right back." The door opened, and night rushed in black and heavy, swallowing the glow of the fire. He stepped out without hesitation, into the dark that had kept me prisoner all my life. I stayed frozen in my chair, my father's words ringing in my skull. Never go outside after dark without a lantern. I didn't follow. I couldn't. At first it was just footsteps crunching in the snow, then silence, then a whistle. Low, steady, not Craig's voice. Too smooth, too hollow. Then a sound that snapped me in half. A scream. It wasn't long. It wasn't the kind of scream you hear in movies, all lungs and echo. It was sharp, cut short, like something had grabbed it out of his throat mid-breath, and then nothing. I sat there, with my hands shaking around the glass, staring at the door. I wanted to run after him, wanted to drag him back, but my body wouldn't move. The rules weren't suggestions. They were shackles, binding me to survival. If I stepped into that dark without a lantern, I knew I'd never step back. So I stayed. By morning, the fire was ash. Craig's boots still sat by the hearth. His coat still hung on the chair. Dinner plates were half finished on the table. But Craig himself was gone. I walked out into the snow, lantern in hand, following his tracks. They led away from the porch, across the field, then stopped, just ended, halfway to the tree line, as if the earth itself had swallowed him. No drag marks, no blood, just sudden emptiness. I stood there a long time, staring at that spot, my lantern flickering in the morning light. Then, I turned and went home. Because what else could I do? That night, I didn't sleep. The house felt different, heavier. The lantern flame wavered like it was nervous too. I sat in bed, clutching it close, whispering the rules like prayers. My father's voice echoed in memory. "Obey them, or you won't see another sunrise." And somewhere outside, in the black fields, something moved. I couldn't see it, but I felt it. A presence, watching, waiting. I knew then that breaking the first rule hadn't just killed Craig. It had woken something up. After Craig disappeared, the nights changed. The silence wasn't just heavy anymore, it was alive. The air felt crowded, like dozens of unseen eyes pressed against the walls of my house. Every time I lit my lantern, I swore I saw shadows pull back, retreating just out of reach. It didn't take long for the knocking to start again. It was soft at first, like fingers brushing across the siding. A faint tap-tap, so light I thought it might be branches, but there were no trees near that side of the house. I froze, lantern flame trembling, and the sound grew bolder. Knock, 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 knock. My throat closed up. Rule 2 pounded in my mind. If you hear knocking on the walls, don't answer. I pressed my hands over my ears, whispered the rule under my breath like it was a shield. For hours, the knocking circled front door, back wall, upstairs window. By dawn, it was gone. When I opened the curtains that morning, the snow outside was untouched. No footprints, no sign of anything, but the wood around the windows had fresh marks, indentations the size of knuckles. The knocking didn't stop. It came back every night, louder, longer, more insistent. Sometimes it was a steady rhythm, like someone demanding to be let in. Other times it shifted into patterns, 3 short knocks, a pause, then 2 long ones, almost like speech. One night, it sounded exactly like the way Craig used to tap on his door when he wanted me to come over. 3 knocks, pause, then a playful 4th. I clenched my teeth, staring at the wood, whispering the rule over and over. The worst night came a week later. I was lying in bed, lantern burning low, when the knocks started at the back door. They were harder than ever, shaking the frame. Then I heard it. "Son." A voice. My father's voice. Rough, tired, exactly as I remembered it. "Open the door, son. It's just me. Please." My blood turned to ice. I gripped the lantern so tight my knuckles went white. The knocks followed. Louder. Desperate. "Let me in. Don't leave me out here." I almost broke then. Almost. Because it wasn't just his voice I heard. After a pause, another came soft, trembling, achingly familiar. "Sweetheart," my mother whispered. "It's cold. Please open the door." I pressed my hands over my ears, tears burning down my face. My whole body screamed to run to the door, to tear it open and fall into her arms. But I knew. The rules weren't wrong. If I opened that door, I'd vanish, just like she had. So I stayed, shaking, whispering the rules until sunrise. When the light came, the voices stopped. The door was untouched, but gouges ran deep into the wood around the frame, like claws had dragged across it for hours. The nights didn't let up. The knocking grew clever, testing me. It mimicked neighbors I hadn't seen in years. It whispered names I'd buried in memory. Once, it even sounded like Jeremy, my cousin who vanished when he tapped back all those years ago. "Come on, man, just one knock, you'll see." I sat curled in the corner, lantern flickering, teeth chattering not from cold but from fear. There's a pull to it, that's the worst part. The knocks don't just sound like requests, they sound like commands. Like something inside you wants to obey, to tap back, to answer. More than once, I found my hand lifting without my permission, knuckles hovering inches from the wall. Only when I whispered the rule aloud did the spell break. One night, the knocks didn't come from one side of the house. They circled. Knock knock on the east wall. Knock knock on the west. Knock knock at the front door. Knock knock at the window above my bed. Over and over, faster and faster, until it felt like the whole house was shaking. I curled on the floor with the lantern clutched to my chest, rocking back and forth, whispering the rules in a hoarse voice. My throat burned, my ears rang, and still the knocking went on. And then silence. Not the good kind, not the sunrise kind. This silence was sharp, sudden, like the air itself had been cut. I held my breath, terrified to move. The lantern flame guttered, weak, as if even fire was afraid. Then a whisper slid through the silence, right against my ear, though no one was there. "Just answer once." I didn't move, didn't breathe. I lay on the floor until light finally spilled through the curtains. When I stood, my body was stiff, my muscles screaming. The walls were shredded with scratches, long and deep, as though dozens of hands had tried to claw their way inside. But the door still held. The windows were still intact. The rules had saved me again. By the time the knocking faded into uneasy silence, I was barely holding myself together. My eyes stung from nights without sleep, and my throat was raw from whispering the rules again and again. But the rules didn't care how tired I was. They didn't bend, not even for exhaustion. And Rule 3 was clear: always leave food at the tree line once a week. Every Sunday morning, my father would carry bread and salted meat to the forest's edge. He never explained why. He never even looked back once he set it down. Just placed it on the frozen ground, tipped his hat like a man leaving payment, and walked home without a word. As a boy, I used to ask who we were feeding. Wolves? Stray dogs? He'd shake his head and mutter, "Not for you to know. Just do it." So I did. Week after week, year after year. I never missed, until that one Sunday. The nights of knocking had worn me down, and for the first time in years, I overslept. When I woke, the sun was already high, light glaring across the fields. My stomach dropped, my chest seized. I scrambled out of bed, heart racing. I had almost broken the third rule. I threw on my boots, grabbed the loaf of bread and the strip of jerky I'd set aside, and ran across the snow. My breath burned in my lungs, my legs trembling. I made it to the tree line just as the light dimmed behind a passing cloud. The forest loomed ahead, silent and endless. I didn't look into it. I didn't want to. I dropped the food onto the ground, whispered a frantic apology under my breath, and sprinted back to the farmhouse. Sleep didn't come. I sat in my chair by the window, lantern beside me, and waited. For a while, nothing. Just wind, faint and ordinary. Then I heard it. Heavy footsteps in the snow. Slow. Measured. Circling the house. The sound of breathing followed ragged. Wet. Too deep to be human. I dared one glance outside, through a narrow slit in the curtain, and I saw it. It crouched over the food I had left that morning, long limbs bent at impossible angles, its spine arching like an animal's but taller, so much taller. The lantern flame flickered, and for one instant, its head turned toward me. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, not like an animal's reflection, but like coals smoldering in a dead fire. I yanked the curtain shut, pressing my back to the wall. My chest heaved. My hands shook so bad I almost dropped the lantern. Outside, the breathing grew louder. Then, nothing. When dawn came, the food was gone. The snow was smooth. No footprints. Only a faint scorch mark where the offering had been. I should have felt relief. The rule had been kept, barely, and I was alive. But dread sank deeper instead, because for the first time, I realized the offerings weren't symbolic. They weren't traditions. They were a bargain, and whatever was out there had noticed how close I'd come to breaking it. There was always one rule I feared more than the rest. Rule 4. Never look directly at the scarecrow in the west field. I obeyed it without question. As a child, I treated that scarecrow like a landmine, something deadly that would only notice me if I stared too long. I never crossed into the west field, not even during daylight. But fear does strange things when it mixes with exhaustion. And after weeks of knocking, whispers, and that thing crouched at the tree line, my curiosity turned corrosive. I needed to know. It started small, just a glance from my bedroom window, curtains barely open. The scarecrow stood as it always had, tall on its wooden post, arms stretched wide, burlap head sagging slightly. 2 uneven black circles sewn for eyes. A stitched mouth curved just enough to look like a smirk, but something was different. Its head was tilted farther than I remembered, leaning, almost listening, and though the wind blew east, its ragged shirt hung perfectly still. I slammed the curtains shut and sat on the floor until dawn. The next night, I made the same mistake. Another glance, just long enough to confirm what I dreaded. It had moved, not much, but closer, maybe 10 feet nearer to the house, its post somehow dragging across the frozen ground without leaving a trail. Its arms hung lower now, the burlap sack stretched tighter over its frame. I didn't look long, but long enough to see the faint outline of something beneath the sack, pressing outward like a skull. By the third night, I couldn't help myself. My eyes betrayed me again, and this time, it was almost at the fence line. That night I dreamed of it. I dreamed I was standing in the west field, snow soaking through my boots, lantern useless in my hand. The scarecrow stepped down from its post, straw spilling from its seams like blood. Its head turned slowly toward me, and beneath the burlap, I heard teeth grinding. It walked without sound, without weight, until its face was inches from mine. The stitched mouth tore open, threads snapping, and inside was not straw, not sackcloth, but darkness, deeper than night, pulling at me like a black hole. I woke screaming, sweat freezing on my skin, lantern nearly out, and when I dared a glance from the window, the scarecrow was closer still. On the 4th night, the silence came. Not the silence of a paused wind or muffled snow. This was the true silence. The kind Rule 5 warned me of. If you wake up to silence, stay in bed until sunrise. The stillness was absolute. Not a creak of wood, not a hum of lantern flame, not even the sound of my own breath. It was as though the world itself had stopped. I lay frozen, eyes wide in the dark, and then I saw it. A shadow stretched across my bedroom floor, long, jagged, unmistakable. The shape of the scarecrow's arms, its head tilting as if peering through the walls. But the window was shut, the curtains drawn. Still, its shadow crept across the boards toward me. I clutched the lantern to my chest, every muscle rigid. I didn't move, didn't blink. I let my body sink into stillness, praying the silence would hold me invisible. Hours passed like years. When the first line of sun crept across the horizon, the shadow shivered, then pulled back. By daylight, the scarecrow was back in the west field, upright, unmoved, as though none of it had happened. The days blurred after that. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. Every moment was spent staring out the window, waiting for it to move again. It became a sick ritual, curtains open, eyes fixed, breath shallow. Each time I looked, I swore its head tilted more, its stitched mouth straining wider, its arms drooping lower. I started hearing burlap rustling when no wind blew, the scrape of wood dragging across frozen dirt. Sometimes I even smelled it, a damp, moldy stench, like rotting straw. I knew I was losing my mind. But worse, I knew the rule was slipping. I wasn't avoiding the scarecrow anymore. I was seeking it, staring, breaking the rule in pieces. And it was noticing. One evening, just as the sun bled into the horizon, I found myself standing at the door, boots laced, lantern in hand. I don't remember deciding to do it. My body just moved. I stepped into the cold, snow crunching beneath my feet, and walked toward the west field. Each step closer made my chest tighter, my thoughts blurrier. The scarecrow loomed larger, arms stretched wide like a cross waiting to claim me. I stopped at the fence line, 1 foot raised, ready to climb. Then, a sound cracked through the air, not wind, not animal, a low groan, deep as the earth. The scarecrow's head turned, slowly, directly, toward me. That was enough. I stumbled back, sprinted to the house, and slammed the door behind me. My heart thundered, my breath ragged, but I repeated the rule aloud until the words lost meaning. Never look directly at the scarecrow in the west field. Never. The night after I stared too long at the scarecrow, I woke to silence. Not the muffled quiet of a heavy snowstorm, not the kind of silence you get when even the owls have gone still. This was the true silence, the kind my father feared most, the kind Rule 5 warned about. If you wake up to silence, stay in bed until sunrise. It came like a smothering blanket. One moment I was half dreaming of wind scratching the windows. The next I was wide awake in a world without sound. The lantern by my bed still burned, its flame frozen in a strange stillness, swaying without making a noise. My own breathing was gone, though I felt my chest rise and fall. Even my heartbeat was silent, though it thundered in my veins. I lay there motionless, eyes fixed on the ceiling, fighting every instinct to move. The silence stretched. Hours passed, but time didn't feel real. My body ached from lying still, but I didn't dare shift. When dawn finally broke, the silence cracked like glass. Suddenly the world rushed back, creaks in the wood, wind at the window, the faint hiss of the lantern. I wept, gasping at the sound of my own breath. I had survived. For now. It returned the next night. This time, it wasn't alone. As I lay frozen in bed, eyes locked on the flickering lantern, I felt a weight settle on the air. Heavy, oppressive, like someone had stepped into the room. And then I saw it, a figure in the doorway. At first I thought it was my father. Broad shoulders, work shirt, the silhouette I'd grown up with. He stood there unmoving, watching me. But when he spoke, I knew it wasn't him. The voice wasn't sound. It was inside my skull, vibrating like a tuning fork. Rule number 1, it whispered. My father's tone stretched thin. Never go outside after dark without a lantern. The figure stepped closer. Its movements were wrong, too smooth, joints bending with no sound of fabric, no creak of floorboards. Rule number 2, it hissed, voice twisting. If you hear knocking, don't answer. But what if it's family? What if it's me? I clenched my teeth, sweat freezing on my skin. It kept speaking, reciting the rules in order, but each word warped further, mocking, twisting. Always leave food at the tree line. Yes, feed us more. Never look at the scarecrow, but it looks at you, doesn't it? If you wake up to silence, stay in bed. Stay still, stay hours. The figure stopped at the foot of my bed. Its face was wrong, shifting, flickering between my father, my mother, Craig, even Jeremy. Every voice I'd ever known, stitched together into one. By the third night, I was unraveling. The silence fell heavier than before, and I knew this was the test. The figure returned, closer now, crouched beside the bed. Its eyes were hollow, glowing faintly like the embers I'd seen at the tree line. It leaned close, its breath non-existent, and whispered, "Break them." I wanted to scream, to run, but my body was paralyzed. All I had was the lantern. Its flame trembled, threatening to die. So I did the only thing I could. I whispered the rules back. My voice cracked, but I forced the words out, over and over. Never go outside after dark without a lantern. If you hear knocking, don't answer. Always leave food at the tree line. Never look at the scarecrow. If you wake up to silence, stay in bed until sunrise. The figure hissed, its form shuddering. The stitched mouths of its many faces opened wide, shrieking without sound. The lantern flame flared, burning brighter, and for the first time, I felt it recoil. I shouted the rules louder, my throat raw, until the first rays of dawn cut through the curtains. The figure exploded into ash and shadow, vanishing with the silence. When I stumbled outside, the world looked the same. Snow covering the fields, the scarecrow back on its post, the tree line dark and endless. But I knew better. The rules weren't just my father's paranoia. They weren't folklore or tradition. They were bindings. Fragile chains holding back something vast and ancient that lived beneath this land. Something that watched, listened, and waited for us to slip. Craig slipped. Jeremy slipped. My mother slipped. And the land took them. I haven't slipped. Not once. That's the only reason I'm still here. I don't tell this story for comfort. I don't tell it for sympathy. I tell it because if you ever find yourself in rural North Dakota, you need to understand what I'm about to say. The rules aren't optional. They aren't negotiable. They aren't superstitions to laugh at. They are life and death. So I'll repeat them one last time. Never go outside after dark without a lantern. If you hear knocking on the walls, don't answer. Always leave food at the tree line once a week. Never look directly at the scarecrow in the west field. If you wake up to silence, stay in bed until sunrise. I've never broken them. I never will. And neither should you.